In today's episode, we're going to talk about how taking the high road as a buyer in certain situations will pay off in the end. I've got a good story for you on a deal I'm working on right now. Stick around. Let's go! So I'm working on a new construction deal right now where the buyer has put the asset under contract during the construction period. We've set due diligence period, we've set a closing date, everything's spelled out nicely in the PSA. And of course, we're in early 2022 when there's construction delays, there's supply delays, there's labor delays. The cities and counties are slow to get their inspectors out. Anything that can go wrong probably did go wrong around this time period. On this particular deal, we had 7 addendums to extend the inspection period because the inspection period was contingent on getting a certificate of occupancy so that we could close 30 days later. There continued to be supply delays. Inspectors wouldn't show up. A vendor got sick, on and on. Meanwhile, the developer / seller, these construction delays are costing him a lot of money. He's going over budget. He has more interest payments. He has more payments on the maintenance of the building and the construction site and his insurance. Obviously, his profit that he signed up for is dwindling. Likewise, the buyer, as we all know in early 2022, had interest rate hikes during this time. I could tell the buyer was getting frustrated, and rightfully so. His cost is going up, and it's not his fault. We had a discussion about whether he should go back to the seller and ask for a reduced price. This buyer I knew had a really cool head, had done several transactions, had the right demeanor. I could tell he was of high integrity. And so it was more of a question instead of a demand to the broker to go back to the seller. The discussion we had was I let him know that this seller is also in a lot of pain. And I went over the different pain points that I just described to you. And I let him know how much money over budget he was already, which was a pretty big surprise regarding the amount to the buyer. In addition, I reminded the buyer that this seller, besides being a really good dude, trades a lot of real estate, develops a lot of apartment complexes, buys a lot of apartment complexes in order to resell in just a few years. So I said, let's think really long term. And this particular buyer was younger, probably in his 30s. This seller was probably in his 50s. So a good 20 years of transacting left for the sell side. And I let the buyer know there's a good chance you'll run into this seller again. And as a matter of fact, if we can close with this seller on time, as we've said, without beating him up, he will know that you could have beat him up, but it will make that second transaction or third transaction so much easier to do. I told the buyer in 3 years, when this guy, and I know he was working on several projects already, goes to sell those, it will be the easiest thing in the world for me as his broker to talk to the seller about that buyer. And hey, remember when so-and-so bought your place over in that city and how they stuck with it and closed? Let's go to him first. In addition, I was telling the buyer how great a letter recommendation would be for me to describe how he stuck with a difficult transaction and still closed, and how I could solicit a letter of recommendation from the seller on how the buyer stuck with it through 7 or 8 addendums to extend. I'll end with this. Was the buyer in their right to ask for reduction in price as a result of all the delays? Absolutely. In fact, the vast majority of folks I deal with probably would have overruled me and asked for it. And they might have gotten it, but they would have lost all chances to do multiple transactions with this seller because that seller would have felt beat up even more beyond what he was already getting beat up by, all through circumstances uncontrollable by him. So as the buyer, when you're in situations like this, don't always look for taking advantage of a situation, even if it's the other side's fault. Look long term. Do they own other assets? Do they have a lot of influence in the field? Do they have a podcast? Do they have speaking engagements? Are they connected with lots of brokers? A lot of investors who are active are pretty well connected. And that's the best marketing person on your team you can have if you can close on time without shenanigans. I hope this video brought you some value. If it did, please give me a like. It helps me a tremendous amount. Make sure you subscribe and you'll be notified of the next video. See you guys in the next one.